The next attribute of a dying empire is the misdirection of energy. And what I would suggest you do is read the works of an economist by the name of C. Northcote Parkinson. Had a very famous law called Parkinsons Law. Expenditure rises to meet income. And I tell all my students, if I paid each one of you $100,000 this year, next year you come back and tell me you couldn't live on it. Because you'd learn how to live on $100,000 and then you couldn't cut the budget. Well, Parkinson had another law, and he said what happens in an organization, when an organization is young and it's vibrant, its energies are all directed outward. Okay? If you take a look at Christianity, when it was first formed, energy is all directed outward, apostles going out to convert the world. Okay? Enormous amount of energy going into the foundation of monasteries and universities and whatever else. Now, as the organization gets larger and larger and larger, suddenly now the energy, which was going outward, now suddenly starts becoming lateral, in which everybody is now doing what? Sending memos to one another. Okay? And the organization now, the energy, instead of going out to get new markets or to get new areas or to spread itself, now suddenly people are worried about CYA. And they're all worried about covering their jobs, and they're sending memos to one another. I can tell you, as a vendor of General Motors for 27 years, when they decided that my company was too small, even though we had good prices, I used to be able to go in, my dad used to be able to go into General Motors. If we had something that had to be changed, we could walk in to the buyer and say, look, we can save you some money here, we'll split the profits. We get the decision in 2 weeks. When I sold my business, I had $250,000 of cost savings on the table for 9 months. And it was all tied up in these committees. And nobody could make a decision because they were all worried about CYA. And what happens now is, when the energies now suddenly become, when it's all lateral instead of exterior, what begins to happen? The organization can't do anything. It stalls, it jams. It will not function. Okay? And one of the things that happened was, they could not make a decision. And I'll always remember the last day that, back in 1987 or 88, that we were called to General Motors and told that they were going to take all the work away from the small companies like myself and give it to just big companies, and we would become tier 2. I walked in the office, and the desk was on one side of the room, and the telephone was on the floor on the other side of the room. And the buyer's giving me the song and dance, and the telephone rings. He runs over to the other side and picks up the phone, back, you know, sits at the desk. I said, excuse me, but how come the desk is here and the phone's there? He said, well, he says, you know, I've been trying for 3 weeks to move that desk. I said, well, get on the other side of it and let's move it now. Oh, no, we can't do that. That'll break union rules. Now, if you can't move a desk in 3 weeks, you got to wonder why you're going bankrupt. Because you can't, nothing happens. Nothing happens. And this is where these organizations are going. They are losing the vital energy. It's a misdirection. The place is too big. And then finally we come to the last one, the failure of information. The best work on this is a work by Frederick Hayek. It's a very revolutionary work. I know that you've read some of his stuff, called The Use of Knowledge in Society, and it was in a book called Individualism and the Economic Order. And the essay is The Use of Knowledge in Society. And Hayek predicted that the Soviet Union would come to a bad end because he says they don't have the information. You see, the information is always developed at the lowest level. It's where the tire meets the road, as it were. The guy who's running are making the tools and dies knows what's going on. The problem is, the further you get up the bureaucratic chain, the less you know. And so therefore you start making mistakes. It's very interesting. I just did some research on World War I, which is not one of my favorite times, nor did I think it was very wise for us to get into that war. But Woodrow Wilson pushed us in, and now we got the mess today. But in any event, you get into the question of unforeseen and unintended consequences, because you don't know. Now, President Wilson didn't realize that when he went into that war, for every boy that died in France, 5 Americans died of the influenza epidemic. Why? Because large organizations, when they make a mistake, make a big one. The flu developed in Kansas in the army camps. And of course, at that time, all these folks are living in very tight quarters. And then, what did they do? They hid the fact from the American people. They were trying to CYA, shipped these fellows overseas, and infected the world. The estimates are 50 to 100 million people died in the world from that flu. Now, if that organization had been on top of its game and had its information, that would have been stopped in Kansas. And one of the major problems we have as these organizations get larger and larger is that they're not able to have the information, they're not able to use the information to stop the mistake when it happens. The Soviet economy was a perfect example of that. They were making things that nobody wanted. And the things that people wanted, they didn't make. And they had all kinds of shortages and surpluses because they simply could not handle the information they didn't know. And so when we look at this, we come out and we say, what is the conservative cure? And the conservative cure, the principle of subsidiarity. What the principle of subsidiarity says is that whatever should be done at the lowest possible level, not at the upper levels. Because here's what happens. The people at the low levels know what's going on. Okay? They know when there's a flu epidemic coming. They know that somebody's sick in that camp and that they're dealing with something different. The bureaucrat in Washington doesn't know that. The soldier in the field, he knows. He's there. He knows exactly what's going on. Okay? The small businessman, they know what's going on. The information is there, and that's why it's at the lowest level. The other one, subsidiarity, goes right along with private property. See, one of the problems of Rome, one of the major problems of Rome is that in order to finance this major empire, and this, they have a welfare state that make ours look mild, they had deprived all these Roman farmers of their land through taxation and through competition with slave labor. So what happened was the farms became larger and larger. They were run by huge corporations. I'm not opposed to that, but they were run by these huge corporations called the latifundia. The people moved to the cities, and when the barbarians came, there was no resistance, because there was no population there. They moved into depopulated areas. Nobody had a stake in the empire. When you have subsidiarity and you have a widespread holding of private property, and you have a widespread holding and interest, the society is strong. And it doesn't make large mistakes. So when we talk about these principles, okay, one of the things that unites all conservatives, whether you're a libertarian, okay, or whether you're a follower of Miss Rand or whatever, is we all believe that what? That what should be done at the lowest possible level. That the principle of subsidiarity works. And we know that because, and I'll just summarize, you don't have overbuilding. You don't have massive bureaucracies. Number two, the energy is directed by each and every small person in that society, not by large organizations. And number three is, you don't have the problem of knowledge, because the people who are responsible have the knowledge to know what's going on. So I thank you for listening to me. If you want any more information, I'll be here afterwards, a comment on it. And if you want to come to the University of Detroit and get a master's degree, we'd love to have. I have put that in, that commercial. But we do teach Austrian Economics over here. We do not use Keynes. Thank you.